Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is Harvey Bracken-Smith, and today I'm honoured to be joined by Dr. Aria. Dr. Aria has worked as a clinical psychologist, specialising in high performance and psychological resilience. He has worked with Academy Award winners, high-profile creative artists, global entrepreneurs, and some of the world's most successful CEOs and companies to protect, maintain, and restore their optimal psychological health and functioning. He's a graduate from St Andrews and UCL and has previously worked for the NHS and Grand Ormond Street Hospital. I feel incredibly excited to speak to Dr. Aria, and this has been a podcast I've been excited to do for a long time. So I wanted to get started off. I mean, there's a lot of speakers, a lot of doctors, a lot of health professionals out there who all think that their way of doing things is the best. As I see on the internet with podcasts like Diary of a CEO, everyone's an expert these days. So I'd love if you could summarize a bit of your work, what you spend your time doing, who you work with, and what makes you different from all the other health experts out there.
So by trade, I'm a clinical psychologist and I specialize in high performance. And the core of my work centers around resilience. Whenever you are stuck or struggling or you're dealing with stress or uncertainty or fear, how can you optimize a resilient mindset and approach what life throws you with as much grounded objectivity and wisdom?
And why is that important to you?
Life, from my own experience and from working with others, can be incredibly hard. And often the fears that we have don't materialize. It's the ones that we often didn't expect which can hit us hardest. And it's at times like that that we can really struggle. And as a psychologist, I've come to understand how the mind will think, the biases that it'll hold, the way that it will draw upon the past, create an imagined future. And your psychology is instrumental in terms of what you then end up doing. And so I'm really passionate about helping others to develop greater self-awareness and self-understanding so that they can be the best version of themselves, but particularly at the hardest parts of their lives.
How have you gone about learning to actually put this into place to help the people that you work with?
So my doctorate, it was in clinical psychology, and there was a strong emphasis on cognitive theory as well as mindfulness-based approaches. So if you take cognitive theory, it grew out of Stoic philosophy. And if you look at a lot of mindfulness-based approaches, including acceptance and commitment therapy or mindfulness-based stress reduction, that grew out of Buddhist philosophy. And so at its core, I'd say the work that I do blends Eastern philosophy with modern science.
What do you think it was like in theory? So, I mean, for a lot of doctors, particularly, I'm studying out in the US, you do an undergraduate, postgraduate, it's a very extended level of education before you actually start working with patients. So what was it like in theory, learning, how to build resilience, how to get people over the hardest points in their lives, versus when you actually started working with clients? Did you notice a differentiation between what the books were saying and the other doctors were saying versus what it was like to put it into practice?
Theory is a lot easier than the practice, that's for sure. In my clinical training, I ended up specializing in the overlap between physical health and mental well-being. And I worked with initially adults who had chronic physical health conditions and also were facing end-of-life conditions. And so then the question often arose is, if you have a limited amount of time, how do you turn up in this life with the time that you have left with as much peace and presence and joy and fulfillment? And then I worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital, like you mentioned, working with the parents of children who either had cancer or had a life-limiting or end-of-life condition. And as a parent, whenever you're dealing with so much suffering and turmoil, how can you be there to be present with with your child, but also with your other children who might not have the condition that you'll still have to be there for. And so that was an incredibly sobering experience, which I think took me to the extreme conditions that we all might ask ourselves at times.
I think there's a big thing about social media in, people like yourself or other top creators online is I feel like there's an information barrier. There's only so much information that you can pack into a 60-second video. We're watching you on our feeds. And there's also a knowledge differentiation in which we think the people on our screen are knowledgeable and we aren't. So on that sort of point, have you found that there are differences from people in backgrounds, races, genders, economic status in how they go about overcoming grief? Or at the end of the day, is everyone just human and that we should look at it like that?
Naturally, I think there's going to be huge influences in terms of biology, psychology, social influences, culture, attachment styles, your relationship to your parents, the experiences you had growing up. At the same time, I'd say that the mind also does work through certain universal principles, and we're all connected on that level in terms of our humanity, but also our suffering. How people approach grief varies hugely, but I think the underlying point is we all have to deal with grief. We all have to deal with loss in some form. We'll all have moments in our life whenever we will meet with unexpected and unwanted events. Your partner might leave you, or your relationship is disintegrating and you've lost the intimacy. You're waking up next to your best friend as opposed to your lover. You're having challenges or fears or doubts or insecurities within yourself that you can tell are holding you back from fully actualizing or optimizing your career. And how we do that is integral, and that's essentially where my work comes in. And I tend to work with individuals who are often successful in their domain of work, but they're then stuck or struggling with an aspect of their life. And they could be entrepreneurs, it's in the legal professions or other professional services, whether it's property or insurance or even the arts. I've worked with actors, I've worked with singers. There's high levels of responsibility, and often they have brilliant minds and they're highly ambitious, but they can reach a point where they recognize that what got them to this point is potentially phenomenal, but it's had a trade-off, or it's come at a cost, or it's not sustainable. And then the question is, from where we are now, what would be the wisest, most powerful approach to take for you to create a life that you love?
But still, on that, it sounds amazing in theory, but I mean, I've interviewed more than 50 amazing people on this podcast, and at the end of the day, I find that the human aspect of people is what grounds them. Also, it's what makes them unique, but also it's what makes people similar. So if you were to have a famous actor, singer, whatever, to come to you, what do they actually want when they're coming to engage with you? Do they want for you to just magically take away all their problems? Do they want to actually engage in the process? And what are some of the biggest barriers that you have found of people that haven't successfully navigated through this process? Or even you spoke about that the mind is often working against us. Could you give us some overall scope as to, again, biggest barriers, how the mind works against us, and whether people want you to just take away their problems or whether they're actually willing to engage with you?
Definitely a common theme amongst all my clients is that there's a desire to evolve, to grow, to learn, to self-actualize, to see how far they can push the needle, to, in a way, take the car around the racetrack and understand if I can better control this car, if I know when to accelerate harder, to brake, to deal with the steering, I'm going to be able to not only perform at a higher level, but then experience this incredible adventure of life, and to do it in a way that they feel good about. In 10 years' time, they can look back and say, do you know, I feel proud of the way that I achieved this. I did it with integrity. I did it close to who I am. I wouldn't say that individuals are looking for me to take anything away, because they become familiar with my work and they realize that the way that I work is to remove the blocks and barriers that are preventing them from being their most powerful self. And an analogy I'd use is yourself is like a river. Now, if a river isn't flowing as powerfully, you don't need to try and increase the amount of water. You just want to look in the river and you want to see where are the stones or the rocks or the blocks or the barriers which are preventing the river from flowing more fully. These blocks and barriers will often be fear. The mind will create fear around rejection, fear around abandonment, fear of failure, fear of being successful, fear of hurting others, fear of not being enough. It will come from insecurities about who they are, not being enough as they are. And so there's this drive in order to try and achieve more, to feel okay inside. So these are the blocks, these are the barriers that we begin to look at, that through understanding, through bringing into the light of awareness, we can begin to dissolve. And then they're able to be in their most powerful form, which is whenever they are being truly present and truly authentic and expressing their own nature with sincerity. And that's their power.
Yeah, there's often that thing that says a problem shared is a problem halved. And I can definitely see it in that scope. And I even think there is something to be said that when you're in a position with someone, I mean, these are world top performers, when you're in a position with someone that you feel is on your level or at least has a greater understanding with you in some scope, I bet there's a level of, as you said, sincerity and appreciation for you being there in that moment. Because instead of them thinking this person can't possibly understand what I'm going through, they feel like you must by necessity because otherwise you wouldn't be there. And so then when they feel understood, like every human wants to be, they can then go about implementing changes to become that better version of themselves, or even, as you said with the river example, being more of themselves by simply removing those barriers.
Completely. A huge barrier which I initially encounter whenever I'm working with a client is that they'll be very aware of how privileged they are. They'll feel very grateful for their lives, for their career, what they've created. It could be a business, it could be a certain level of finance or wealth, it could be a family, and their mind will begin to judge their pain or their hurt or their suffering. And their mind will say, I shouldn't complain, this shouldn't be an issue, I should be more grateful. There are people who have a lot less than I do, and so my suffering essentially is invalid. The mind will actually begin to demean or belittle their own challenge. And so part of the work and understanding is that pain or suffering is not relative. If someone came and hit your finger with a hammer, Harvey, but then they hit my leg with a baseball bat, the fact that I may be experiencing a higher objective level of pain doesn't make your pain any less. It simply is the pain that you're experiencing. And so the comparison game or the relative game can actually keep people stuck for a long time because they find it hard to acknowledge it or even to share it with others because they think, well, they won't understand it. They think that I'm just making a mountain out of a molehill. And so the approach that I take is one of non-judgment, one of understanding, one of compassion, which is it's not about weighing up what you're going through compared to someone else. It's about understanding this is impacting your life and this is your life. So how can we walk through this together so that you can experience less anxiety, less stress, less judgment, less shame, and more peace, more fulfillment. And then from that place, move and act and create and build in your life.
I've amongst probably everyone else listening to this, have experienced grief. And one of the biggest things that I didn't think, sorry, let me rephrase. What I thought would be the biggest cause of my pain would have been by losing that person or some event happening. But what I actually found to be, for me personally, the biggest impact of that grief was actually from the impact of other people. And I call it selfish grief and selfish emotion in that, so my mother unfortunately passed away a year and a half ago. And I found that within my core circle, I have 3 younger siblings, I have a dad. within that, we would all kind of mourn her together. But with extended family, friends, business partners, people that didn't know my mum as well, it almost felt like they'd want to call me or hang out with us or see us. And instead of just saying hi, speak to us for 20 minutes or half an hour, telling us how bad they felt about the situation, which led to this sort of piling on and closing in effect as all of their grief and all of their emotion kind of piled in. Have you sort of noticed that with other people you've dealt with? And what are some ways that people that aren't going through grief, who are sort of on the fringe or, are upset by a celebrity's death but aren't their family member, or, they've been upset by some event but they're not actually directly involved with it, how can those better people be better people to actually help those who are suffering the most?
Grief is such a complicated area, and I'm sorry to hear about your mum passing. I lost my brother. It'll be coming up to 3 years ago, and I can remember particularly at that point, whenever someone would maybe try and call to say something which they thought might be helpful, but inside it just felt deeply unhelpful, and it could have created in a way a space where I just didn't want to be in that space, and I just wanted, in order to create time for me to feel what I'm feeling. I think it's very, very hard for the people around if someone is going through grief. The only part I can think to invite would, in effect, just be like a gentle presence and checking in with the person and really trying to listen to where they are and what they need, whether that is to take their mind off things, to distract them, whether that is for them to share their emotion, whether it is to share memories, whether it's actually to have a bit of space right now. But I think it requires a very delicate sensitivity to be aware of what is my emotion and what is my intention with being in that person's life right now. Is it to make myself feel better? Is it to show that I care? Or is it to actually be there with that person suffering?
Yeah, and I would sort of extending onto that point, I think again, on the theoretical side, it's nice to want everyone to have a gentle presence around you, but in actuality, I haven't really found that to be the case. And even with all that bullshit, I think you kind of see people's true colors and true emotions. So you can see if that friend is really a great friend to you or not. And as hard as it can be, it shows the true side of people. I want to kind of navigate to a slightly different topic and more talk about your overall impact. So you mentioned you work with a lot of high net worth individuals, celebrities, athletes, people at the top of their game. What's your overall goal as Dr. Aria? Is your goal to work with the quality of people, so just work with one or two people, enable them to be their best selves, or through what you're doing with social media, impact a large quantity of people and help a larger scope of people?
So I should probably explain that I have worked with individuals in the public profile or high net worth individuals. I'd say the majority of my clients, though, fall into the space of, again, being successful in their career. In their eyes, though, often they're not there, so to speak, or they're only at the start of their journey, or they're making inroads, but they feel like there's so much more for them to develop or build or create. And so it's about joining them where they are on their path at that moment. And my work is, I'd say I've got, a small group of one-to-one clients who I love working with. They've got a huge amount of admiration and respect and love for them. And then on the social media side, which is more geared towards relationships, my hope and intention is to try and share positive, truthful insights and principles pertaining to relationships that could potentially help people on their journey.
Because you've had so much exposure to a lot of successful people, and I've probably, as I said, I've had 50 conversations, and throughout my life, I feel like I've had some scope as well. So I'll offer my opinion as well. But I'd be curious, having spoken to all these people and then seen successful versus unsuccessful people, do you think anyone can be successful?
I think one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves is, how are we defining success? And a lot of the time we inherit an idea of success, which will initially fuel us. And generally it's an external metric. Success would be a higher level of wealth, a higher level of fame, a higher level of status, a higher level of power. And whenever that's the driver, I've invariably found that a person will reach a point in their life where they then begin to question it. Because that idea of success was equated in their mind with feeling at peace, feeling happy, feeling content, feeling fulfilled, feeling good within themselves. And there's the external journey, which often we relate to career, profession, what it is that we're building or creating, and that is important. But there's also the internal journey, which is centered on clarity, peace, tranquility, creativity, moving from a place of presence and innovation. And they're separate journeys. And a lot of people initially put a huge amount of focus on the external journey, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a personal sacrifice, either to their mental well-being or their emotional health or their physical health or their relationships. And then they begin to pause and look at, okay, what's missing? Why is there a void here? Why has nothing changed? Why is it so underwhelming? And in a way that gap becomes bigger because they have more, but there's a bigger void within. And that can become even more disconcerting. And then the journey becomes, okay, what is this internal journey? What does it look like? What does it mean to understand myself, to have greater self-awareness, to have greater self-insight? What does it mean to move from a place of truth for myself, staying close to who I am? Because another part that I've seen is, irrespective of the level of success, even whenever it's been into global companies that are bringing from the hundreds of millions into the billions, if the founder or the creator or the chief exec felt as if they sacrificed their values along the way, it was then met with a sense of disappointment or shame.
So what's the answer here? Like, I feel like it's often, you need balance, or sometimes it's about, going further on one and then picking back up the other. How do I, I'm only a 20-year-old kid and I want to achieve a lot of the things that you stated before as that I shouldn't be aiming at. How should I go about trying to achieve those goals whilst also maintaining a strong sense of self, identity, confidence, less anxiety, less stress, internal calmness, maintaining my values, whilst trying to get to the top?
The foundation is awareness, and there is something to that dictum, to know thyself. I think this journey is about knowing yourself, and through that you need to understand yourself, and behind that you need to become more aware. And a huge part is becoming aware of what is driving me, and truly being honest with yourselves. Where is this coming from? Not only what do I want to create, but where is this coming from? What am I hoping I will achieve through this? What feeling do I think I might attain? What do I think it will say about me? And then how will I feel about it? Another part is identifying whenever we're moving from a place of fear. Essentially, there's two forces in life. There's fear and there's what I would call love. And when we're moving from a place of fear, you can feel it in your body. It's constricted, it's tight. There's a sense of even desperation and need. And that can be a very powerful motivator. So you can achieve a lot, but there will reach a point that I found that's also the road to burnout and disconnection, and it's not sustainable. People often have a huge fear, though, that if I let go of my fear, I will not be active, I will not be productive, and I won't be as driven. can you achieve and be active from a place of love, which is a place of feeling grounded and confident and having clarity and moving from a place of power? Absolutely. So I think it's also about identifying which place that you're moving from. And I'd say a third part would be, like you're saying, is to begin to think about not only what you want to achieve, but how you want to achieve it. Pay attention not only to the outcome, but to the process. And there's a great story of the pioneering rock climber Royal Robbins, and he made groundbreaking ascents in Yosemite. But he did it in a groundbreaking way because he didn't damage the landscape surface of the rocks. He didn't hammer pistons into the rock surface. He wanted to do it in a way that preserved its natural beauty. And he said, getting to the top is nothing. The way you do it is everything. And if we can begin to cultivate more awareness and place more value on how we do something rather than what it achieves, then I think you'll be on a steady path.
There are a few things that come to mind there, and I'm not unassuming responsibility for my own life, but I feel like there's a correlation between success, usually age, and seniority. And I feel like you gain more autonomy as you sort of rise up the ranks. So it wouldn't surprise me that a lot of highly successful individuals who go into firms have had to do things according to what their higher ups wanted them to do. And then they've sort of gained autonomy as they went forward. So sure, there might be a mindset shift from I've been sacrificing my values to now I can put my values into place. But there's also a question to be had of whether they even had the autonomy in the first place. The second thing I thought about when you were talking about with regard to fear versus love, I feel like discipline almost fits in the middle, because there's a point at which, I go to the gym because I hate myself or I'm fearful that I don't have an amazing body, or I love the gym so much that I, want to become strong and I want to be a better husband, I want to be a brother, a better partner, better at work, get more mental clarity. But I still feel that there's balance in the middle between that. Like I might love going to the gym for an extended period of time, but when grief or other events happen, I feel like it's discipline that gets you through, not necessarily fear or love. And also, sorry, I'm kind of going on, I thought of a few ideas here. The other one is that when you talk about passion, when I talk about passion, a lot of that people might think it comes from love, where a lot of business leaders say passion doesn't come from love, passion comes from skill. And so that might be a reason why people use fear to drive their success rather than love, because the passion will come out of that success. So sorry, I kind of threw quite a lot of points at you there. But yeah, discipline, autonomy, and skill from success.
Well, to provide a kind of like counter perspective on it, I think you were saying that as people rise in seniority, they often then rise in autonomy. And I think in a way you can challenge that, because as you rise higher up a structure, often the handcuffs just become tighter. They get more gold plates attached to them, but they're still golden handcuffs, because the more that you gain and the more that you rise, one, you have more to lose. So I remember working with an individual, and he kept on thinking that the higher that he would rise and the more money that he created, the more freedom and autonomy he would have. But actually, he found out it's the complete opposite, because first of all, his mind would always change the goal. And this was financially a very wealthy individual, and it went from 50 million to 100 to 200 to 500, and it was even at the level of 750. And all that happened was the fear rose with it. What happens if I lose all of this? Look at what I've created. The mind also will find a caveat and will say, well, look, you've been successful in this area, but you could have just been lucky. And it often doesn't even attribute its success to itself. Freedom and autonomy is a mindset, and in a way is a choice. Now, of course, we'll often be working within constraints of a company, but there's often more choice than we think. And it's often fear which will lead us to say, well, I shouldn't voice my opinion. I shouldn't offer a different perspective, because if I do, either I'll be railroaded or I'll be fired or something detrimental will happen. But even in the most contained conditions, we have autonomy. An extreme example would be Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for 27 years, but he still talked about a degree of freedom and autonomy that he had within his constraints. So I think a major part is recognizing how much choice we have. We often think we don't have choice, but we do. We may not like the consequences, but the more that we can take ownership of, I am choosing this, or I'm choosing to be this work, or I'm choosing to be silent, or I'm choosing to speak out, that in a way will begin to create more of a seeing and understanding of the power that you do hold. With the second part, where you have love, you have fear, and then potentially you can have discipline in the middle. A downside with something like discipline is, one, I say often it's a little bit more related to fear. I need to be disciplined because if I'm not, then these negative consequences could happen. And discipline can be very rigid, and it doesn't allow for as much flow. So it could be that whenever you are going through a difficult emotional time, or you're going through a physically exhausting time, that actually easing up in the gym is moving from a place of love. Actually recognizing that rather than pushing myself too hard, I'm going to be a little bit easier with my body. And it's something which I often have found challenge with. I found myself pushing myself in January and not listening to my body and trying something when I was too tired in the gym, doing a calisthenics exercise, and my tendons which attach my biceps to my forearms both got ripped off.
I'm sorry.
So I just had to have surgery to reattach my biceps to my forearms. Part of the reflection for me was there was that moment where, though, I was pushing myself at a time where if I really was listening to my body, it would have been to be more gentle with myself. And so I still think that with something like discipline, it can be too rigid, but when we're moving with a closer sensitivity to what is right and true for us in this moment, it will flow, it will ebb. There may be a certain baseline that we want to maintain, but it'll turn up in a different way. And then, can you remember your third point?
Yeah, I think my third point
was skill coming from passion.
A passion coming from skill.
Yes, passion coming from skill. And I'd say in a way that you can be passionate about something but not be skillful. You can be skillful at something and not being passionate, but you're most powerful whenever the two are aligned.
But what comes first? Because I feel like if you had both at the same, it's not like the best football player in the world becomes that straight away. They might be skillful, they might be passionate. So what do you think is the best to seek first? Like I often hear, I'm probably going to go into the finance world as my first bit out of college, and a lot of that is skill focused rather than passion focused. I feel like there's an alignment for myself, but I'd say for 99% of people, it's actually they're focusing on skill rather than passion. So what would your recommendation be? To focus on what you love or what you're good at, and how do you find the second part or connect the two?
Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you have to. And whenever I look at individuals that I've worked with, the ones that have careers with the greatest longevity, they love what they do. They truly do. And they started this when they had nothing or very little, and they're still continuing it when they could stop at any point and they wouldn't have to continue to work, but they do because they love it, because it's a part of expressing who they are. Of course, you could find counterexamples where you could be incredibly passionate about something but terrible at it, and potentially there may be certain limiting factors that means that this may not be a viable, sustainable career path. To give a little side example, I started off in medical school. I left when my father was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but he's still alive today. And my heart wasn't in it. I then gravitated towards acting because I was fascinated by the human mind. And I wanted to understand and find my own voice and understand myself better. And I did that through character work, through play, through understanding relational dynamics. I wasn't terribly skilled at it though, and I wouldn't have had a flourishing career in acting. Life then, though, took me onto another path, which was psychology, which for me was almost like a blend of the two. One, I felt like I can leave a positive impact on others, but two, I love the mind, and I love understanding how it works and what drives us and why we do what we do and how we can have the knowledge but not put it into action, and what's the difference between the two. But that only comes whenever you, though, keep on staying close to what lights you up, what makes you feel alive. If you were given £1 million a year, irrespective of what you did, and you couldn't earn anything else from it, what would you choose to do? It'd be an interesting question to explore.
Wait, I got what's the two options? I could do $1 million, but I can do whatever I want.
Totally. You're gonna have to stay, work in this career for 10 years, but you're paid the same amount every year, no matter what your outcome is. What would you choose to do? And if you had to come up with 5 different professions or 5 different areas of life, what would the different 5 be?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to think to myself, I really don't think I'd be doing anything different to what I'm doing now. I'd probably go down the finance path, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Maybe I think the only difference between what I'd be doing is more time autonomy. But I feel like at this point in my life, I don't really need the time as much. I think a big part of what I want to do is have some form of balance, like prioritization of sleep, relationships, staying fit and healthy. Like those are, and obviously my family, they're sort of like my cornerstones to life. And if I lose those, then there's something going wrong. But I feel like in the sort of path I'm aiming to lead, I mean, the stuff I'm trying to do after college is more markets focused. So like the stock market, so it does close and open at a certain time. So that kind of gives me at least some balance with the real world, with, doing other things. So I really don't think there's anything different. I've asked myself this question quite a lot. But I think in order to do the other things, like give back in bigger ways, I feel like I want to have a bigger impact, which you can gain through more wealth or more followership. And that's not to say I'm not doing that as well now, but I feel like there is something to be said by greater external and extrinsic success. You can leverage that to greater implement your values into the real world.
Completely. And what's beautiful about what you said is that you have your drive, you have your ambition, you have an idea of how your purpose will turn up in this world. And at the same time, though, you're aware of the other pillars in your life that you don't want to neglect. Because a lot of the time, whenever we're driven too much by fear, and whenever we create an identity purely on what we do, then our mind will neglect these other parts. Those other parts will begin to deteriorate from the relationships, again, your mental health. And at that moment, what your mind will do is it will return to its place of comfort and security, which will be work. So it'll then double down at work. Things aren't going well at home, so then I'm going to focus more time and more energy at work, and it becomes a vicious cycle. With all my clients, they've come to reach a point that these other parts are important to them. And yes, they'll want to scale and build and have a huge impact on a national or global scale. But at the same time, they don't want to lose the essence of who they are in terms of, am I a good partner? Am I a good father? Am I a good friend? Am I a good man? Am I a good woman? And whenever we can stay close to that, that is the part which is often the most fulfilling as well.
Yeah, I think in my life, particularly when I was younger, there was a lot of the midlife crises, and I'm sure I'll have my own quarter life and midlife crisis when I get there. But I think a lot of my 10th life crisis or 15% crisis, whatever, was actually in doing too much and wanting to be the best athlete in X number of sports, be the best musician, best academic, best entrepreneur and everything. But that not only, gets rid of those relationships and stuff at a younger age and has a detriment to your mental health, is you can't actually achieve that extrinsic success by being good at everything. And I think for me, it's been that focus on one thing or two things that have enabled me to not only continue on the path that I'm on, but also maintain and be a lot happier when I'm doing it. And actually, although I still do disagree with what you said with regard to having just as much or more autonomy when you're younger and then the golden handcuffs, I do see a point in looking back in my own life that actually the times that I was happiest was when I implemented my own autonomy. So the times when I said yes to that extra 7 meetings or that extra project or not joining that club, I know it's not the same as being in the business world, but as a student, those are the things that are important. And actually the times when I was more protective of my time and gave myself free time to spend with loved ones, even though it's not what I thought I should do, that's actually when I was happiest and I performed the best. Like, I feel like now doing less, I'm performing a lot better and I'm a lot happier than when I was doing what I thought I should do and doing more things. So I can appreciate what you said with regard to more autonomy there. I want to quickly go on to, so you started your own psychology service in 2017, I believe. And I feel like a lot of people decide to dive into entrepreneurship to, have more autonomy, to, maybe they disagreed with what was going on in their previous business and they wanted to implement it in a new way, or, they noticed a gap in the market. I don't want to focus as much on why you started it, but I want to focus more on how you've become so successful in it. I mean, having this experience and inviting amazing guests like yourself on this podcast, I know it's not easy to connect with amazing people, to get their contacts in the first place, and then actually getting them to work with you or pay you in some scope. How have you gone about networking with the most incredible people on the planet and not only used your skills as an amazing psychologist, but also as a salesman to actually close these people, work with them, and enable them to be their best selves?
Mm-hmm. It's probably not going to be a very useful answer, but I don't feel like I can take any credit for the opportunities which have arisen even. My focus has been, in a way, to walk the walk. And so I've never felt comfortable exploring an area or even potentially walking alongside someone if it's not either an area that I've studied and researched and understood, or it's not an area that I haven't also explored and gone through myself. And so a huge part of my path has been also focusing on my own development and what I would call moving from a place of truth, understanding the truth of who I am and what I stand for and what's most important to me, and staying as close to that as possible. To answer your question more directly, I think through doing that, then potentially whenever I meet someone, what is not important to me in a way is, as much as I can be impressed by what someone has created, which is incredibly impressive, my task in my relationships and in my profession is to be truthful. And so whenever I'm working with someone or I meet someone, I let go of the concern of how I will come across, or whether or not they will like me for what I say, or whether or not they'll be hurt by it, or whether or not they'll then decide not to work with me or end working with me. My task is to be truthful, to share with them what I'm hearing, what I'm experiencing, what's coming up intuitively, and to often reflect back what I believe is truthful. And through that other person then seeing truth, even if you don't like it, you can't deny what is true. And that's whenever the transformation can happen. And so it's been the case that through that and through trusting, in a way, the universe has brought different experiences, often through serendipity, through being in one place at one point and meeting someone and having a genuine, real conversation with them, which was meant to be 5 minutes and turned into 8 hours, and you end up, truly connecting, and then a lot of it then becomes word of mouth. Someone will say, "Do you know what? I think my friend or my colleague would really benefit from a conversation with you."
What I think is funny on that scope is I think from my interactions in connecting with people, that's exactly how people network. I think from an outside perspective, and I think when I was younger, you think there's these very meticulous, mechanical ways of interacting with people. Oh, I want to reach the rock. Oh, I have to do this and do this and do that. And here's step 5. And I think that's the TikTokification of, today's society, in which you feel there's a step-to-step guide. When what I've found is actually just connecting with people, just being you and being genuinely interested in a person. And that's the same thing pretty much every time that enables you to connect with said person. I wrote down a list of topics which I sent to you before on embracing fear, masculinity versus femininity, rationality versus intuition, joy versus pleasure. And to be honest, I got a lot of those topics by listening to other podcasts that you had been on. I'm not sure if there is, but I would be curious if there are any topics or things that are important to you that you don't feel like you've shared in a public forum before that you think would be helpful for us to discuss and also be helpful for our listeners to hear.
That's an incredibly difficult question, Harvey. And probably it's a difficult question because I'll often be led by what comes up intuitively at the time. And so in a way that could be any of the topics that you've discussed. I don't think there's anything that comes to mind right now, being completely honest.
Okay, I'll pivot on that point. And to be fair, that's quite an unfair question to me because as you said, a lot of the topics that you discuss are ones you're well educated on. So it's not fair for me to bring up something random. But even including those, I know it's not cookie cutter, so maybe I'm going against this approach, but do you think there's any one thing or a collection of things that you think that if everyone in the world or a large part of people in Scotland, in the UK, the US, the West, or even the rest of the world changed the way that they thought about things, that would make the world a better place?
I'm just going to borrow from Gandhi, I believe. But so often in life, we're looking outwards to try and change other people or the environment. And you see it a lot of the time in relationships. People will say, this is what you're doing wrong, and if only you did this differently, then the relationship would be better. And the egoic mind does that because it's trying to protect its identity, and it creates an identity of separation where there's me versus you. And all the focus is on the external, and the external is outside of your control. So actually you're moving from the most powerless position that you can. I think of more people, more of the time, if all of us began to seek insight, and insight is formed from the prefix in, an English word sight, so it literally means seeing inward. If we can better understand, where is my hurt coming from? Where is my insecurity coming from? Why am I being aggressive or passive aggressive? What am I truly trying to communicate? What is it that actually needs healed within me? The more we go on that journey and we understand ourselves better, it then becomes clearer what action we need to take in the world. Because rather than going out there to try and fix and change what we feel inside, when we're moving from a place of peace, honestly, less begins to trigger or irritate us or annoy us or frustrate us, because there's a lot more peace and there's a lot more acceptance, and we can see where action is actually needed most.
I'm coming up with a ton of sayings today, but something I've learned is that the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know. On that same point, what do you feel that we don't know as a society yet on your area of study, and how can we go about learning it?
What is it that we do not know? I'd say the question that often people don't ask is, who am I? Because what happens as we grow up is that our mind will create an identity, but it's often based on others' perspectives or experience with the world and other people. And it creates this idea of who we think we should be and what we think it means to be a perfect partner, or to be successful in business or to be someone who's valued. But these are all ideas that we've taken on from society. You could take any part, even whether is it marriage and children, or what a successful career looks like, or what a successful relationship looks like. We inherit a lot of ideas, and I think the more that we can begin to ask, actually, who am I, and who am I without all these different areas that we've created as linked to our identity? So who would I be without work? Who would I be without being a successful lawyer at this law firm? Who would I be without being the successful entrepreneur? The more we can understand ourselves, I think then the more we can also then act in line with who we are. And again, it goes back to Zen Buddhist philosophy, which is enlightenment or freedom comes from being present and expressing your nature and sincerity.
You spoke about walking the walk, which I would equate to you talking about your extrinsic self and the success you've had in getting really deep into your subject, becoming an expert on it, and working with some of the most amazing people on the planet. I'd be curious as to whether you feel you're also walking the walk internally, to if what you're doing now, I mean, you taught both your biceps, I'm sure that wasn't the best thing in the world, of whether you found that you genuinely are happy doing what you're doing. You spoke about a lot of your lessons come from the Buddhist methodology. In the Buddhist world, religion, there's this idea of enlightenment. And, do you feel like you're getting close to that you are the finished product, or is it a constant improvement over time? And on that point, what do you think, aside from the pure, I studied this, from a pure intrinsic standpoint, at what point did you feel that you were educated enough to teach others how to achieve this way of being? Was it at the point that you felt you had achieved that yourself, or was it at the point that you at least could look inside yourself to be able to help others look inside themselves to both become better people?
Mm-hmm. So whenever I said walk the walk, I actually meant internally.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of dealing with feeling lost. So if I look at myself in my early 20s, I felt lost. I was deeply unhappy. There was a lot of fear, doubt, insecurity. I wasn't in touch with my emotions. There was a huge amount of anger. I turned away from my pain and would distract myself with alcohol and drugs. That then impacted my relationships. That's when anger would come out. That was very destructive. And ultimately, I felt very lost. And so even before going into psychology, I began to explore the path to what at the time I just kept on calling inner peace. What I knew was I wasn't at peace inside, and there was a part of me that couldn't stand it anymore, to the point of looking for options, and one would just be not being here. So it was that path that then took me to the Buddhist understanding of the nature of suffering. And I think there's a huge amount of wisdom in ancient texts and ancient philosophies. I think if you want to ask a modern New Age question about AI, then go to the modern thinkers. But if you want to ask an ancient question about what is virtue, what does it mean to live a meaningful life, what is the meaning of our existence or the purpose of our time here, then a lot of the ancient thinkers who've been, contemplating this for centuries and have built on shared wisdom, then that's the path to go. So I had to go down that path in order to reach a place of deeper understanding and deeper peace and deeper connection to my emotions. And then even whenever I felt I'd reach a certain level of wisdom in this area, life just dealt me another hand, where I was married with my partner. We were together for 10 years. And then she told me that she'd been having an affair with a person from work, and she was pregnant with his child. And that then in itself brought a whole nother level of essentially my house being burnt down, metaphorically speaking, and me having to rebuild and understand how I and we got to that point, and the ways in which I'd even lost myself on that journey, and who am I now, who am I truly, and what is the life that I want to build. And so it's by going through that kind of walk, or dealing with grief and beginning to reach a deeper place of acceptance and still love and connection, even whenever there's loss. So it's going through that sort of journey internally that I think supports me in my work, because there's a certain level of connection and understanding where, even though I don't know precisely what you're going through, I get it. And I can share my own experience, or I can share the principles that I've used in my own life and offer them to you in case they can be a part of your journey too.
I appreciate your willingness to open up, particularly with the story with your wife. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like and what that is like. But there's something I've noticed from your story, in which bad thing occurred, sense of change, become your new self. And something which I feel is a positive, or even a way for you to be even more appreciative for the person you are, is I feel like when bad things happen, as human beings, there's an expectation that we should change because that thing must be my fault. When from my perspective, I feel that bad things are going to happen anyway, and it's not your fault. But I think despite that, you still became a better person. So I think that's all credit to you, in that no matter what you were like before, there's no excuse for that event to have occurred. But I think the fact that you've become an even better person despite that, I think that's all power to you and the person you've become. And so I applaud you for your willingness to not only take that, but also to help other people.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very wise observation. Bad things can happen, which in a way you have no responsibility for their occurrence. So particularly often with someone passing, with my brother passing, I cannot draw a direct link to his passing and my actions. Like you're saying, that there can still be growth there. There can still be lessons there. There can still be a way of burning away what is less important and relevant and meaningful in life. Because an event like that can often almost put life into 4D in a strange way, or melt away what's less important, and you have such clarity and acuity on what truly matters. And so that kind of event can help you to realign to what is true. An event like what happened with my ex-wife, I wasn't responsible for her actions, but I did play into a context. The relationship reached a certain stage out of which she acted, and the choice she made was having an affair. Now, is that a choice that I would recommend or promote? No, but I still had to look at how did we get to that stage, and what parts were mine, because I potentially could have gone into another relationship, and 10 years down the line, the relationship could have been in a very similar place. So it's not excusing or condoning someone else's actions, and it's not taking responsibility for them, but it is taking responsibility for our part, often in a relationship dynamic, and learning from that.
I feel like it's maybe a discussion for another time, but something I've found as I've just become older, become more aware of my surroundings, particularly in the political landscape in the US, is I feel like there's like partisan media, in which you've got the right, like Fox News, and then you've got the left, like CNN, in which there's a very us versus them mentality, in which every person tries to rationalize X event occurred, oh, it's their fault, there's a reason. Whereas I've started to find over time, and it's one of the reasons I like to do this podcast, is there's a lot more nuance to why things occur, and therefore why things should happen over time. And so I think a personal discovery, and what I want to find out, is I want to hopefully lead in positions and help run organizations and have impact, is to find the line between what I think happened. I mean, I usually go for more the rational side, and actually also to try and find that nuance in which there's a lot of emotion dealt. I think if people realize that the President of the United States or Prime Minister of a country made decisions not just from a rational standpoint. You can rationalize in hindsight, but actually from emotion, I think people would be a lot more fearful, when I actually think there's more power to understand the true motivations of where something comes from, because that then allows you to react and to respond to those situations instead of being blinded by thinking it's all from a rational basis. I've got 3 final questions. The first one I wanted to ask is, if you were to look back in 100 years' time, even for yourself, maybe it's even longer because you're loving what you're doing, so it might be a longer period of time. What would you want your legacy to be, and how would you want to be remembered?
In a way, I'll give a different answer to that, which is, in the strangest way, I just don't concern myself with legacy. It just doesn't, at where I am in my life right now, and it might change, but it just doesn't seem important to me, because it's remembering the past, and it's focused on the past. And I think my focus becomes much more on the present. And I think the challenge with sometimes thinking too much about legacy is you're thinking about how you were perceived or how you're remembered. So it's putting a lot of emphasis on someone else's perceptions. And I think whenever we do that, we tighten up and we become a little bit more afraid, and we're not as bold in our lives. Whenever we're concerned too much about how someone else sees us, we're not then completely natural. And our greatest power is whenever we're even more natural, and we're not worried about the impact. We're much more focused on where it's coming from. Now, my words can often be misunderstood, because often I'll say, it is not your responsibility how other people feel or what they're going through. And it is not your responsibility if what you say hurts another person. And people will often take that to then think, well, that's incredibly self-focused, or there's no concern for others. But I'm deliberately making this point because where your focus should be is where this is coming from. Is this coming from a place of ego and coming from a place of fear and hurt, where the words that I'm speaking in a way, and we've all done it, we can tell when we say something to hurt the other person, they've hurt us and then we jab back, or we're saying something to try and teach them a lesson or to try and contort their understanding of where we're coming from so they won't do what they're doing anymore. Versus understanding, am I being truthful? Am I coming from a place of love when I really self-reflect and be honest with myself? And can I also share that? And so the way that we express it might change, but we can be fully honest, and it may hurt the other person to hear it. But whenever we're speaking from a place of truth, which for me is a place of love, they will feel that. They'll understand that. They won't react in the same way, because we're moving from an open-hearted place.
My penultimate question, and you can choose any scope of time you want, and maybe you've answered this because you said you only live in the present, but what's next for you?
Good question. Jim, that's the part I struggle with most. And so that's the part that actually my brother is helping me with, because of course, I see the value in creating, a plan and a vision for the future. I'd say on a sort of psychology or work front, it would be to try and continually expand reach and impact, whether that's through more people through social media. I'm in the basis of researching, writing another book. I'd love to write another book to hopefully reach more people. I'm developing a course right now on individuals who are going through infidelity or have gone through infidelity. Now you can heal after heartbreak. I'm beginning to put on a webinar. I've got 3 upcoming webinars dealing with can you trust again after infidelity in relationships, and potentially exploring the area of podcasting as well. But I think it'd be more focused on reach and impact.
Sounds like you have no idea what you want to do next.
No.
I'm kidding. Um, and my final question is, and I ask this to every guest on Personable, is what is one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this episode?
To find your own answers and to question everything that we've spoken about, whether I've said it, whether you said it, to really question it and to tease it through and see what parts stick with you, see what parts resonate, and see what parts don't, and potentially even understand what's behind both.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I thoroughly appreciate your openness and your willingness to answer all of my questions and debate certain topics with me. It's interesting when people answer a question straight away and don't really think about it, but I can see your willingness to think about something and add your own spin to it. I appreciate you holding me to account on the walk to walk actually being your internal self, as I think is the most important because it's the inner self which attracts the out. As much as the whole vibrational theory and law of attraction, we can debate the extent to which that's true or not. But I feel that in anyone, when they're truly walking the walk and deliver exceptional work with someone or service, I feel like that just naturally attracts amazing people. And that can be used as a networking tool for other people that want to learn how to connect with amazing people is just do a great job and they'll come. And lastly, I hope that throughout my own career, that I don't forgo my own values and hopefully that I can remain open and willing and, stick to my heart and what I know is good. And I hope for the same with everyone else listening, that we can continue to leave the world a better place than we found it, not in 10 years' time, but in the present moment. So thank you so much for your time. It was a huge pleasure, and I hope that everyone listening took a lot away from this.
Thank you, Harvey. I appreciate that.